this material. I've been teaching this for 10 years, which means the first 15 years of my marriage, I didn't know about this. I mean, you know certain things, but not this whole concept. So, all that to say, soak it in and put it into practice. So, let's talk about how we achieve this of pursuing intimacy, relentlessly pursuing intimacy. We talk about talking, but let's see if we can understand how can we have effective communication, doing effective talking with our spouses. So the first thing that you need to understand is that when we talk about communication, we're talking about different things. You have to understand that communication has different components. This is not going to work on the TV. So you see there, you have the content of the message, the other person, and the messenger. So those are the three basic components of communication. I am the messenger, you are the listeners, and then, of course, there's also the content of the message. So what are some of the obstacles to communication? Sometimes the content of the message is the obstacle, is the problem, because you may or may not understand what I'm talking about. At other times, the messenger is the problem, because the way I express things is not effective for you. And then another times, it's the other person that maybe you're going through something right now, and your mind is not here. So my content might be right. I may be expressing correctly, but you're not able to receive it. Okay? So that brings complications in communication. Now, as if that wasn't enough, sometimes it's a mixture of everything. Sometimes it's a combination of all of these things. So how do we then solve communication issues? Well, just be aware that there are problems in communications. So how do we balance this? The first thing is that you need to proactively choose to listen to your partner. Any of you have seen that video on YouTube where the little kid is talking to the woman, Linda, listen. You've seen that one, right? It's hilarious. But why is he saying that? Because he's not getting the impression that she's listening to him. That's why he's, listen, Linda. And so the first rule of communication is that you have to listen to your partner. How many of you have heard of active listening? Active listening is when you are proactive in that process. And we're going to see how it works here. As I listen to my partner, I validate my partner's point of view. That does not mean that I am in agreement with that. Okay? To validate someone's view does not necessarily mean to be in agreement with those views. It simply sends a message that I am listening to you. I understand where you're coming from. I may not agree with it, but I understand it. And so when you're using active listening, you're listening to what the person is saying, and then at some point when they allow you to, then you repeat to them what they said. You summarize what they say. So what I hear you saying is this. Am I correct? And you're open for corrections, right? And sometimes, when you start doing this, you'll realize that very often what you thought you heard is not what you heard. And so it gives them an opportunity to explain. So then, after you validate your partner's views, then you're going to explain your thoughts and feelings. Now you're going to get into this is the part where you say what you feel and what you think about what they're saying. And then you're going to validate your partner's views again. So it's a give and take. They speak, you validate their point of view, you share with them how you feel about that, and you validate their point of view. So my wife and I had a conversation this morning. She does not particularly like when I comb my hair the way I did it last night, with my bangs up. She says, you don't look professional. I mean, going to church, blah, 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 blah. And I validate her views. I said, yeah, I understand you don't like that. Now let me tell you how I feel about it. I like it. And I said, but I understand that you don't like it. So this morning we came to a commitment, a compromise. You see that I'm not full wave. I came down a little bit, just to appease. She would like me to do what Eddie's doing. You see the whole classic. But does your hair ever come out of shape? I've never seen you. It's like your hair is always set.
They're like wires.
Yeah. So that's just a simple example to say, okay, here's my view, but you listen to the person, okay? And even though I may have not completely gone 100% with what she wanted it, at least she has a sense that I'm listening to what she's trying to tell me and that I'm sharing with her. And so we're exchanging ideas instead of attacking each other. Because oftentimes when the problem with communication, we say, well, soldiers come to my office, couples come to me, well, we have a problem with communication. Okay, what's your problem? And when they start talking, I realize they don't have a problem with communication. They can communicate quite well. The problem is that they're not respecting each other, that they're attacking each other, and one person wants to dominate over the other. So it's not that they can't communicate. It's not like they cannot express themselves. They can do that, but they're not being considerate of the other person. This process helps us with that. And then you blend your view with your partner's, which is what I did this morning. So her view is comb your hair to the side. My view is full on wave. Let's do a mixture. And when we're talking relationships, this is crucial. You will never get what you want 100% of the time the way you want it. Sometimes you'll get what you want the way you want it. Other days, you're not going to get what you want, period. Some days, you're going to get what you want, not quite how you want it, but you're going to get some form of it. And part of growing up, part of maturing, is understanding that I don't always get what I want whenever I want it, however I want it. Sometimes I get whatever I can, and that's okay. I teach another seminar on trust, and we talk about moving from the me to the we. See, when we're born, it's all about us. The world revolves around us. And if those of you who have had children know this, when our children were babies, they could not care less about their parents. When they were hungry, they wanted to be fed. When they were dirty, they wanted to be changed. When they were tired, they wanted to sleep. And they had no concern for any one of us. But as we grow up, we realize that the world does not revolve around us. And if you're going to enter into a relationship, and if you're going to have a long-lasting, healthy relationship, you have to move from the I, me all the time, to the us, to the we. And that's going to mean that you're going to have to give and take, and you're going to have to blend your view with your partners. Why do you think the Bible says that you should not marry people of other faiths? You know how difficult it is to blend that? It's almost impossible. And some people say, well, we made it work. Yeah. I've met with couples and yeah, we go to church on Sabbath and then on Sunday we go to his church. And the kids grow up to be uber confused. They don't know what to do with this. Because it's hard to blend that. Now let's look at a biblical example. Let's look at 1 Corinthians 8, verses 1 through 13. If anybody can look that up real quick, I greatly appreciate it. And just read the entire passage, 1 through 13. Anybody has it? 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 through 13. The Apostle Paul is writing to the Corinthians. There's an issue there, as there sometimes are in churches, and he's trying to resolve that issue.
This is from 1 to 13?
Yes.
Okay, I'll read it. Food offered to idols. Now, as touching things offered unto idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffeth up, but charity edifies. And if anyone think that he knoweth anything, he knoweth nothing yet as he ought to know. But if anyone love God, the same is known of him. As concerning therefore the eating of those things that are offered in sacrifice unto idols, we know that an idol is nothing in the world, and that there is none other than God but one. For though there be that are called gods, whether in heaven or in earth, as there may be, gods many and lords many. But to us there is but one God, the Father, of whom are all things, and we in him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, by whom are all things, and we by him. Howbeit there is not in every man that knowledge, for some with conscience of the idol, unto this hour eat it as a thing offered unto an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled.
Okay, stop there for a second, sister. So notice what's the issue. The issue was that sometimes when you went to the market, there was food there for sale, meat particularly. And because of the Hellenistic culture, the Greek culture, some of these had been offered to idols and then put in the market for sale. So the contention was that some people were saying, you shouldn't eat that meat because it has been offered to idols. Now, if you look back in the Old Testament, have we heard of this before? We have. Where? The book of Daniel. Daniel and his friends asked the guy in charge of the menu there for the king and says, we can't eat that. Why? Because this was offered to idols. And so in the Old Testament, that was clear. You should not eat that. But Paul is now bringing a more profound understanding. And what is he saying? He's saying, look, what are idols? Nothing. So what if somebody prayed to a rock to bless the food? We know nothing happened. There's nothing wrong with that, right? So, because we know there's only one God, we know the reality, then we don't need to be concerned with that. But then he says, however, verse 7, he says, however, there's not in everyone that knowledge. For some, with consciousness of the idol, until now eat it as a thing offered to an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled. What is he saying? Not everybody understands this, but they're still eating the food and thus violating their own conscience. And so the Apostle Paul then, verse 8, but food does not condemn us to God, for neither if we eat are we the better, nor if we do not eat, are we the worst. So what is Paul saying again? He's bringing a more profound. You know, you've heard people saying that, you know, I am vegetarian. And they say it with a sense of holiness. Well, I'm not. Good for you that you are. But Paul says it doesn't make you any better. Okay? Jesus, in other parts, says, it's not what you eat what defiles. It's what comes out of the heart. Now, those who don't know take that to mean, that means I can eat everything. Anything, whatever I want. Well, no, that's not true. We do have rules. And the Apostle Paul was not referring to unclean foods. He's talking within the parameters of what they already understood to be true. But beware, verse 9, lest somehow this liberty of yours become a stumbling block to those who are weak. For if anyone sees you who have knowledge eating in an idol's temple, will not the conscience of him who is weak be emboldened to eat those things offered to idols? And because of your knowledge, shall the weak brother perish for whom Christ died? But when you thus sin against the brethren, the wound and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never again eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. So, what is Paul talking about here? The first thing is the content is the message of the discussion, right? And Paul, he was to clarify what was said or done. So that's the content. The messenger, meaning the speaker, explain what you mean or intended. That's verse 7. So Paul is explaining what he means by what he's saying. And then verses 10 through 13, then he talks about the perception of the listener, validate the perception of the listener. So he explains the problem. He says, we know that this is not an issue. And then he explains the content. Then he talks about the people who have problems with it because they don't understand it. But when they see you eating, they go ahead and eat, even though they don't think that's right. So they're sinning against their conscience. And so Paul is turning around saying, so now you see what's happening here. Now, even though you're not sinning because you know, because you did it in front of them and they sin against their conscience, now you're sinning against the Lord. So, and then he goes back to the blending and says, so, even though I know that there's nothing wrong with it, for the sake of those who in their weak conscience would sin against it because they don't understand, I will not do it. So ultimately, effective communication involves clear and loving speech, attentive and respectful listening, and a mutual responsibility for what was said, done, or perceived. So, clear speech, effective listening, respectful listening, and then a mutual understanding. And you see it there. Paul expressed clearly, people listen, and then here's the mutual understanding. So, for instance, like I mentioned before, I'm not a vegetarian. But anytime I'm invited to eat with someone, if we're in a restaurant, and this is Carlos Molina's practice, this is not for you to think that this is the law. This is just me, okay? I always ask, Pastor Eddie, are you a vegetarian? Yes. Do you mind if I eat meat? Why? Is it a sin for me to eat chicken? No. But I don't want to offend the brother. And because I don't want to offend him, I don't. All my family, my wife and my children are vegetarian. And that's why in my house you'll never find meat. Because I respect my wife. And they respect me enough to leave me alone in my Chick-fil-A addiction. All right, so healthy communication achieves something more than what either partner on their own could bring to the table. See, we all have things that we bring to the table, but without healthy communication, we cannot effectively bond and bring the best of each other. But by communicating effectively, we're able to do that. It is one thing I was talking to a couple that I'm counseling, and very quickly I realized that, they're just beginning. They're not even married yet. This is premarital counseling. But they haven't reached this level of effective communication. And so when he's the planner, she's spontaneous. And so right now where they're at is that she would be like, whatever, you plan it, and just go. They will be driving down the road, and she notices that the car needs gas, and she says, gas station. She says, look, you need gas? There's a gas station. His response is, no, it's okay, I'm looking for another one. And she is frustrated because she doesn't understand, what's wrong with this guy? You need gas? There's a gas station. Can you not put the two together? If they had effective communication, she would already know that he has a plan because he's a planner. And so he already knows which gas station he's going to. She would be able to ask what is the difference between one gas brand and the other, if there's any, but at least in his mind there must be some, which is why he chooses one over the other. And so they would be able to understand why each other does what they do. Now, this would not mean that she would agree with him, right? But at least she would understand. And because she understands, she would avoid the frustration. Does that sound familiar? All right. So, any questions so far? And I just blew through this real quick, but it's in your workbooks on pages 10 and 11. Okay? So now, before we move on to the next session, real quick on pages 12 and 13. So on page 12, it starts talking about the RAM plan. The RAM plan is that you have huddles. What are these huddles for? Again, is to put intentionality in our relationship. We put intentionality in just about everything else we do. But we need to put intentionality in our relationships. So we suggest that you do a monthly huddle, right? And this monthly huddle, you plan out what you want to accomplish next month. We're going to talk about, later on, we're going to talk more about this. But just to let you know that you need to be thinking about at least once a month, let's sit down together and let's plan. What do we want to accomplish as a couple? Because she has needs, he has needs. There are things that need to get done. How are we going to accomplish this? And then if you go to page 14, you will see here the calendar that you can use for that. And then we're going to talk more about the top 10 list here. But these are the things that you want to address in your huddles. How we're going to address these needs. You don't have to address all of them at one time, but you have to choose which one you will be addressing. On page 13, there's an example there for healthy communication. And there's this exercise that you can do. It's identify the feeling of the speaker. So when someone says something to you, you can respond by, it seems like you're feeling frustrated. It seems like you're feeling this way or that way. And it just helps you understand where they're coming from. Sometimes people misunderstand your emotions because they misread you. I remember sometimes people have said, "Why are you so mad?" I'm not mad. I was actually deep in thought. And as I was going home last night, I was thinking, man, I was really tired. I wonder what kind of impression they got from me last night. Because I know I was tired. And I know that, sometimes when you're tired, it doesn't matter what you're trying to say, your body language is just sending a completely different message. And so your action is important, page 17, but also is your attitude. That's something that we're going to touch on a little bit later. Let's move now to dealing with the trust part. Okay, why is this important? We talked about forgiveness this morning, and again, I have an entire seminar on the issue of forgiveness. One of the important things that you have to understand about forgiveness is that forgiveness is given. People don't have to earn your forgiveness. You ought to be willing to forgive. Ideally, when we reach, I would say, the pinnacle of the forgiveness mentality, you are pretty supposed to forgive. So when we were coming this morning, just as the Tukwila Highway ends, just before the big hill, I learned yesterday why everybody's getting on the right lane before you start going up the hill. And so I was trying to move to the right lane, and I saw this vehicle, a gray BMW, and I managed to move. My wife was following me, and she tried, and this guy just switched lanes, went all the way to the left to the lane to turn left, and accelerated and cut the other car and just kept on going up the hill. And you know what my wife asked me? Do you think he was Puerto Rican? I said, nah, probably. But at that moment, I immediately was angered because this fool could have caused a major accident. And then immediately I remember my own teachings about forgiveness. This guy doesn't even know that I exist. And here I am angry in my car with someone whom I do not know. And he's already gone. And there's nothing I can do about it. So why am I upset? It doesn't make any sense. So I said, forget it. Forgive him because he doesn't know what he just did. He doesn't know what he did to me and to the other drivers. So, but when we look at trust is different from forgiveness because trust is earned. And we're not going to get into a whole lot into the trust, but I will tell you this. Trust has to do more with how you live your life than with what you say. You can earn forgiveness by asking for it. But if you want to earn trust, you're going to have to work for it. You're going to have to demonstrate to people that you can be trusted. And of course, depending how big or small has been the breach of trust, it'll take, a greater amount of effort. But here, when we're talking about trust, we're thinking, what is trust? And trust is the positive belief that you have in your spouse. So when you look at your spouse, that positive belief that you have about that person, that is trust. So you can go, or he can go to war for 12 months, and you trust him or her because you have a positive belief in this person, that this person is going to honor you and your relationship with him and not going to betray you with anybody else. And it is a confidence you feel from the opinion you hold of your spouse. So your trust is based on that confidence you feel based on the opinion. So let me ask you real quick. How many of you have a good opinion of your spouses? All hands should be going up right now. If you have a good opinion about your spouse, raise your hand. Seriously? No, you don't? Am I not being clear? Is there a problem here in communication? Do you trust your spouse? Do you have a good opinion about your husband, ladies? Yes? Some of you are like, I don't know. So, but that is trust. If you have a good opinion, then you feel confidence in your husband or your wife. And so, trust then is this positive belief that I have about that. And when you have trust, you form a picture of your spouse. For instance, growing to know God and have an accurate belief or trust picture of a God is a primary goal of the Christian walk. The idea of the Christian walk is that we're supposed to get to know God. And the more I know God, the more I can create a positive trust picture. Remember yesterday we were talking about this? When it comes to God, the more you know, the more you can trust. Unlike human beings, sometimes the more you know about a person means the less you can trust that person. When it comes to your spouse, ideally, we want to, the more we know, the more we trust. But let's face it, there are some areas in which the more you know, the more you realize, hey, you know what? I can't really trust this person with this. So my wife, I told you yesterday, she can't trust me with grocery list, because I'm, by the same token, there are some things that you know, we just don't do in my household. She doesn't do the checkbook. Not because she can't, because she doesn't want to. So I know I can't trust her with that because she's not going to do it. So the more we get to know the person, the more we get to find out how much we can trust him or her in our relationship. Now, let's look at some biblical examples dealing with our Christian walk. Ephesians 1:17. Here we go, Ephesians 1. Let's see, 17 through 19. Look what the Apostle Paul is saying here. That the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of glory, may give you the spirit of wisdom and revelation in the knowledge of him, the eyes of your understanding being enlightened, that you may know what riches of the glory of his inheritance in the saints, and what is the exceeding greatness of his power towards us who believe, according to the working of his mighty power. So what he's saying, what are the key words that you're seeing here? You're seeing the words that you may what? That you may know. Through revelation, that you will come to the knowledge of him. And what is the point of knowledge? Is right on the next verse. So that you can understand and be enlightened. So the Apostle Paul was using the same principle that we're trying to teach you here, because the more you get to know God, the more you get to trust him. Let's look at 2 Peter 3 real quick. Second Peter 3, verses 18 and 19. But grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. To him be the glory both now and forever. Amen. I don't know why they put 19 there. There's no 19. It's like, what? I think they meant to write down 17 and 18. You therefore, beloved, since you know this beforehand, beware lest you also fall from your own steadfastness, being led away with the error of the wicked. So now the knowledge here is keeping us from being led away with the other people, but rather grow in grace and knowledge. So the idea is that knowledge is a constant thing, that we are continually to grow. Yesterday I told you that it doesn't matter how long you've been married, you will always have to grow. There's always growth to be made. Why? Because we continue to change. Because my wife knew me as a 47-year-old, but as of March 21, I turned 48, so now she's got to figure out what this guy looks like. Okay? It's the same person, but it's a different stage of life. Let's look at two biblical examples of trust. Paul, Barnabas, and John Mark. And this is the experience of Acts 13, in which Paul he's out in a mission trip with Barnabas and John Mark. And John Mark apparently was a mama's boy. That's what the Bible tells us. And he got homesick. And so he left them. And then in chapter 15, Paul is planning another trip, and Barnabas is saying, hey, let's take John Mark and whatnot. And it caused such division that what happened? That they split. Why? Why do you think that Paul could not trust John Mark? Because of what he had seen. Because his behavior in the past. And have you ever come across people that have over and over and over broken trust with you? And then they come and say, please, 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 I promise you, this time will be the one. And you're thinking, that's exactly what you said last time. Again, forgiveness is given, trust is earned. I forgive you, but if you want me to trust in you, you're going to have to demonstrate all the pleases and promises in the world will never take the place of actual action. And then you see Peter and Jesus. Let's go there real quick. Matthew 14. Let's look at this experience real quick. Matthew 14, 22 and 23. Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. Now when the evening came, he was alone there, but the boat was now in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waters, for the wind was contrary. So this is that experience in which Jesus has been teaching, and there's this idea by some of the crowd, hey, we should make this guy our king. He can, if we go to war and our soldiers die, he will resurrect them. We don't have to bring food because he can make food. This is a great idea. What do you think the disciples were thinking? We like this plan. We're going to be with the king. And so Jesus sends them away. And shortly after, he comes by, and when you read Scripture, particularly the book of Mark, Mark says that Christ's intent was not to go towards the boat. He was intending to pass them by. But they saw him, and when he says, "It is I," Peter did what? He got out of the boat and he walked on water. Now, it's interesting, when people talk about this story, they talk of Peter like a loser because, well, he drowned, he sank. But they forget the part where he was walking on water. Where was everybody else? In the boat. So who are the real losers in the story? The people who never left the boat. At least Peter got out and walked on water. Well, what do you think would happen in Peter's life next time Jesus asked him to walk on water? I mean, Peter trusted Jesus that one time on the basis of who Jesus was and what he had done. They had been together for a while now. He had seen Jesus do the craziest things that nobody has ever done before. And now Jesus is walking on water. And so when Jesus calls on him, Peter just goes out and walks on water. And his faith was based on the evidence, was his trust and faith in Christ was based on the evidence of what he had seen before. So as we seek to develop trust in our relationships, we need to understand that it is built on our behavior, not necessarily what we say. Now, one of the challenges of this is how we view things. And sometimes people see things differently, right? So let's look here and tell me what you see. When you look at this image, what do you see? Who sees what? Raise your hand and tell me. You see a young woman. Wait. You see what? An old woman? You see an old woman? A young person. Okay. So how many see the young lady? How many see the old lady? After a while, you get to see both. You see, so you see there, down there, if you see the young woman, you're seeing the neck area here, and the collar on her neck, right? And she's like looking to the side, and you can see her chin and then her little nose and eyebrows, and she has a hat and her hair and her ear. If you see the old lady, what's the biggest thing you're seeing there? Her nose. And the chin in the bottom. Now, after you've done this a while, you'll be able to see them both. But when you see this for the first time, usually just see what you just see, right? And it's like, how could it? You have to think in order to see the other. Well, it's the same thing in relationships. You see this thing one way, and you see this thing another way. I just wrote a letter. Been writing back and forth with a friend. He's talking about the covenant, and he wrote a letter to another friend explaining to him the old covenant versus the new covenant. When I read the letter, I said, "Wait a minute! This is not Seventh-day Adventist theology. This is evangelical theology that sadly many Seventh-day Adventists have preached, and we have done it wrong for a very long time." And so I'm talking to him, and basically we're both looking at this, and somehow we're seeing different things. Let's try another one. Let's see what you see here. What do you see? What do you see, brother? Who sees angels? Okay. Who sees something else? Bats? And he sees a cat. Okay, that's interesting. That's the new one. So this is entitled Angels and Demons. But you will see your brain will immediately recognize one image and the other one does not know what to do with it, therefore it ignores it. And it is until you start listening and analyzing and thinking is that you can see that the black shaped are the demons, but the white shaped are the angels. So if you said, I see demons there, you're right. And if she says she sees angels, guess what? She's right. So you're both right. But here's another thing. If you each stick to your idea of what is there, now you're both wrong. If you simply say, look, I see demons and there's no other way that there's anything else other than what I see, you're wrong. Because clearly there's something else. And how do we know this? Because she's seen it. And so if she takes the same position and says, no, I see angels and there's no other way in the world that you can tell me that there's anything else other than angels, she's just as wrong. So we can be right and wrong at the same time based on our attitude towards what we're doing here. So I want to propose to you that in looking at our partners, in relating to our wife and to our husband, instead of having polarizing views, we come to more of a middle of the road approach. Okay? Ever watched the movie The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly? It's all the guys, yeah, of course we watch that. The ladies are like, why would I watch a movie entitled The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly? But when my view of you is the good, I focus only on the good. When I am in love, when you're in love, could you see any kind of problems with the person you fell in love with? No, all you could see was the good. Have you ever tried to talk to someone who is in love to convince them that that person is not good for them? Right? It's a total waste of time. They don't get it. They can't see it. In Spanish, the word for that is novio, which literally means can't see or didn't see. No, novio. And if it's a female, novia. But yeah. Do you have that word in? Yeah. Novio, novia. Yes. Well, novio means he didn't see. Yeah. Because love is blind. Because when you're only focusing on the good, you fail to see the rest. Now, often what happens is after we get married and life gets complicated, then we switch to another extreme. And now I view you as bad. And when I view you as bad, I focus only, I view you as ugly. And when I view you as ugly, I only focus on your bad. And very often, I am amazed at people who come to my office and cannot stand each other. I mean, they literally hate each other. And so I'm sitting there thinking, how is it possible that these two hate each other so much? How is it possible that these two at some point in time loved each other to the point that they even have children together? How does that work? How do you go from the good all the way to the ugly? And you know, and they'll be like, there's absolutely nothing that we can do to solve this issue. I cannot stand him. I cannot stand her. I don't even know why. We come up with all kinds of excuses. But what if instead of going to either extreme, we move to the center and we just realize that we're sinners? And so when my view of you is the bad, then I focus on your good and your bad. When I realize that you're a sinner, just like I am, then I can focus on the stuff that you do good and the stuff that you do bad. My wife does many things that are great. She keeps a clean house. She's a good cook. And then there are things that I do not care for. And we often talk about it. But if I only focus on the stuff that she does good, then I will ignore all the other problem areas in our relationship. And eventually, that will build up and it'll explode. Now, if on the other hand, I only focus on the stuff that she does bad, then we're just going to be miserable until we decide that we can't live with each other anymore. Which is why we want to go for an approach that is a little bit more balanced. Not everything is good, not everything is bad. It's somewhere in between. And part of this has to do with the fact that more often than not, when your spouse wakes up in the morning, they do not say to themselves, "Thank you, Jesus, I'm up. I'm going to make every effort to make him miserable today. I'm going to make every effort to make her miserable today." I don't think that's the usual prayer. But we do make each other miserable at times. But if you remember that she loves you, you remember that he loves you. Yeah, he's a pig, but he loves me. You know, I know he's not doing it on purpose. He's just a pig. All right. She's not doing it on purpose. She's just neurotic. It's okay. When you have that, now you can process all these things. Which is why last night after I got home, I was able to go to my room and kiss my wife, and she knew that I was sorry. Because she wasn't trying to annoy me. I mean, do you really think that she knew I was watching this video when she called me? No, she was genuinely trying to care for me and expressing her concern. But I'm a man. I don't need you to be worrying about me. And I will tell her, we'll be driving together, and she's like, "Stop touching the phone, you're going to have an accident." I say, "Woman, have I ever had an accident while driving by myself? What makes you think I need your advice? I drive by myself all the time. There's nobody there to help me, and I do just fine. So would you please stop it? Because I can do this." And of course, she never likes that response. But she's just trying to be helpful. She's trying to show her love for me. And so when we have that understanding that, hey, my spouse, he or she's not trying to be hurtful, they're just not perfect, we can have a better understanding of relationships. I am not saying that there are not people out there that are purposely hurtful. Please do not hear me say that. And there are some relations that need to come to an end, sadly. But what I am saying is that for the most part, generally speaking, normal couples don't wake up in the morning wishing evil on their spouses. Okay? Now, what happens when we focus constantly on the negative and we don't address situations and we don't resolve things? Well, little things begin to add up. Have you ever had a pebble in your shoe? It happens to us when we begin in our relationship and things happen and we do not address them. We choose to ignore them, or we get angry but really do not resolve the problem. And so eventually these little things become big things. And now your foot is sore. You have a big old sore in your foot because you didn't pay attention to what was happening. And finally, these big things are all the things that you can see. So how is it that a couple that was so in love 3 years ago, sometimes these days 3 months ago, can be in a state in which they just cannot even see each other? They can't talk to each other. That's where it begins. You begin with the little things, unresolved issues, and you don't talk about it. And that unresolved issue becomes now a sore in your soul, and you don't talk about it, and eventually becomes a huge thing, and now this is the only thing you can see. Oh, by the way, this happens also in the church. You know, when things happen in the church, and we fail to address them because we don't want to offend people. And let me tell you something, folks. True love, it doesn't try to offend, but is not afraid of offending as a process of healing and restoration. Sometimes you will have to talk to your wife, to your husband about something, and they're going to be mad. They're going to be upset. They're going to be offended. But if you don't, that little something is going to become a big something, and it's going to potentially end your relationship. And it's the same thing in the church. That's why we're encouraged to confess our faults to one another. So if I come here and Eddie steps on my foot and it really hurt, I could walk away and not say anything. And maybe the next time I come, he inadvertently stepped on it again. Now my foot is sore, but I still chose not to say anything. And then he invites me yet another time, and he steps on it again. I'm going to explode. I was like, dude, what's wrong with you? Every time I come here, you step on my foot. What is it? If you don't want me, don't invite me. I won't come anymore. And Eddie will be like, what are you talking about? I have no idea what you're talking about. And so very often this is what happens in our relationship, that we get to a stage where all we can see is the big things, and the other person, sometimes they have no idea what you're talking about. And we end up with a crippled relationship. So what does Philippians 2, verses 1 through 8 can teach us about this? Let me look that up real quick. Philippians 2, verses 1 through 8. And I decided not to ask you guys to look it up because I think they're recording this. And so since we don't have a mic, I'm just going to read it real quick here. Look, Philippians is a very interesting letter. Chapter 2, therefore, if there's any consolation in Christ, if any comfort of love, if any fellowship in the Spirit, if any affection and mercy, fulfill my joy by being like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord, of one mind. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ, who being in the form of God did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant, and coming in the likeness of men, and being found in the appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross. So what is the Apostle Paul saying here? So what is the primary goal? Verse 5. What does it say there? Let this mind be in you, which was also in whom? In Christ. He is saying, look, you need to learn to think like Christ. And then he goes on to say, to have a Christ-like attitude toward others. Now, let's look at the 3 mandates that the Apostle Paul places for us. Be united, be humble, and be conscientious. Be united in your relationship by keeping the same mind, same love, united spirit, and intent on one purpose. When a couple just is not united, they're always pulling in different directions. Now, this is not easily accomplished, folks. You have to work at it. You have to negotiate. My wife and I have different personalities and therefore different styles of doing things. And so, for instance, when I told my daughter yesterday, are you going to come with us to church? She says, no. I said, okay, here's the deal. You can go to any church you'd like. You're going to be 22 years old, so I'm not going to tell you where to go, but I'm going to tell you that you're not going to stay here. You're not just going to sleep in this house, unless we all agree to stay here, we all go to church. So, because the commandment is for me, my wife, my children, and those who are within my gates, it applies to you. So this morning I asked her, what are you going to do? She said, I'm going with you. Okay, that's up to you. My wife didn't quite see it. I was like, oh, maybe we should just let her be. It's like, no. And so then my wife said, well, what if I drive the car and then we spend the morning with you there, and after lunch we come back? And I said, fine. We went there together. We worshiped together as a family. But I'm also respectful of the fact that my daughter has been working very long days, that my wife's health is not the best, so she gets tired after a while, and this is going to go until late. So, we made that balance. And so we're still united, but we came to a mutual understanding. We're taking into consideration the needs and the wants of each other, and we can remain happy. Now, that comes at a cost, because now we drove 2 vehicles up here and 2 vehicles back. So there's a greater cost in expense. But when I do the math as to which one would cost me more, well, shoot, gas would have to be like $10 a gallon to cost me more than my relationship. And at the end of the day, guess what? I have to go back to that house and sleep with that woman. So here's what's going to happen tonight. I'm going to go home and she's going to be happy with me. Right? And tomorrow I'll put more gas in the cars. So be united in your relationship. This, by the way, takes planning. A lot of times we run into trouble because we don't plan things. Be humble. Avoid the power struggles and do not act arrogantly. Now, this thing about being humble is sometimes people get it confused. I am the head of the household. And I say this, and sometimes my soldiers are like, whoa, what are you talking about? Yes, in my household, I am the head. The buck stops with me. But that does not give me liberty to be a jerk and to abuse my wife and to do whatever I want in my household. That's not the meaning. I am the head of the household. I am responsible for my family, and ultimately, we're going to do what I say we're going to do, but I am not a dictator. Very often, we do what my wife wants to do. I still say we're going to do it, but we do what she wants to do, which is the same relationship Christ has with the church. Do you remember when the Israelites were in the desert and God spoke from Mount Sinai? What happened? They were afraid, and they told Moses, no. You tell God that He speaks to you, and then you talk to us, because we're afraid. And what did God do? He did that. Who was in charge? God was in charge. He determined what was going to happen, but He took into consideration His people. So in my house, I determine what's going to happen, and I take into consideration my wife and my children. And sometimes this takes a little bit more back and forth than other times. Sometimes I will confess, I will do what she wants to my own disappointment, because that's not what I want to do. But it's not about me. It's about us and what's better for the family. And sometimes she does what I want, very sometimes. And, you know, you can't always be happy, you can't always please the other person. But you can always respect the other person and ensure that as you're moving together as a couple, you are taking care of each other. And lastly, be conscientious. Do not look out just for yourself, but pursue the interests of your spouse, which is what I just explained. If I just look out for myself today, I would have said, nope, we're going in one car, I am a minister, people expect you to be there, and suck it up, honey cup, and let's just go. No, I got to look out for the interests of my wife as well as mine. And I was happy that she came, because here's the other thing. She could have said, well, you know what? We're not going with you. I'm going with Sarah to the local Lacey church, which is 10 minutes away from my church, from my house. And would there be anything wrong with that? No, there's nothing wrong with that intrinsically, but I would have been sad and embarrassed that here I am again, and my wife is nowhere to be found. And so I was glad that we were able to negotiate that by using this model, which is a biblical model, being united, being humble, and being conscientious about each other and the needs that we both have. So when we do this, then we can move to replacing our resentments with respect. And so, how do we do this? First of all, we admit our own shortcomings. People who can't admit to the fact that they're not perfect always find themselves in trouble. You've heard that pride comes before the fall. Pride comes before the fight too. Usually you end up in a fight because you can be too prideful to admit that you're wrong. So let's be honest with ourselves. Hey, I know I'm not perfect. One of our little areas of a struggle in our marriage is the door to the pantry in the kitchen. How could that become a problem? I don't know, but my wife likes that door closed at all times. I don't care if it's closed or open. Which means when I open it to get something from the pantry, I usually don't close it, because it doesn't mean anything to me. If the door is open, it's open. If it's closed, it's closed. But every time she comes down, she notices the door. And if the door is open and there's nobody there looking for anything, I will hear about it. And so she will be like, why is it you can't close the door? And so immediately I'm in the defense now, because what did she just do? She attacked me. Am I capable of closing the door? Of course I am. So why are you questioning my ability to close the door? But that's what we do, right? Why can't you do this right? And I said, honey, when this first came up, I was like, what does it matter? So what? So here's the solution. When you walk down, if the pantry door is open, walk to it and close it. Done. How about that? Well, that didn't work. But then I remember, and I said, okay, just be humble. I admit to myself that I don't care if the door's open or closed. It means nothing to me. But I also realize that it's too easy to close the door because it means nothing. So, close the door. Right? It's easy. I just have to remember it. but I'm getting better. Every day before I go to work, now is the last thing I do. I close all the doors. I close the laundry door, the bathroom door, the pantry door, the everything. I make sure all the doors are closed because I don't want to hear about this. It's not that I'm not doing it for any spiritual reason. I'm just being smart. I'm just like, okay, I'm not perfect, but I can work on this because I want to avoid the fight. So by admitting that you're not perfect, that you have issues, you can avoid fights and understand that when someone calls you out on something, you realize, you know what, you're right. I messed up. Remember your partner's strength. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So, in order for me to replace resentment with respect, instead of thinking of all the things that my wife has done that bother me, I should replace those thoughts with her strengths. So my wife and I are very, very different. Extremely different, almost opposite. Now, opposite do attract, but you don't want to be too far apart from each other. We didn't know that when we got married, so too late for us. Now we just got to figure it out, right? And so my wife, as you notice, she sat way in the back there. She might have spoken to some of you if you came and spoke to her. She's not the outgoing person. She likes to work behind the scenes. She likes quiet. She likes peaceful. She would never confront you because she doesn't like confrontation. I love a fight. I don't care. I like to be in front. I like to be the center of attention. This is why I do this. It fills me up. I get my energy from being up front here. And so we're very different. If I only focus on her, what I would consider her weaknesses, I would resent her for not doing a lot of the things with me that I want her to do. But when I recognize that she's different than me, and that even though she doesn't meet a number of needs that I want, or the needs that I have, or wants that I have, that she meets other needs, then I can focus on her strengths, and now she becomes beautiful again to me. That's why beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And you see couples walking down here thinking, what in the world did she ever see in that guy? Evidently something that you're not seeing. But as long as she's seeing it, they'll be okay. And then focus on ways your partner helps you, because the whole is greater than the sum of its partners, right? So how does my wife help me? How do I help her? We complement each other. We try to complement each other, right? We're not perfect. She's a great cook. I cannot cook to save my life. I know this to be a fact because as early as last Thursday, just 2 days ago, I tried once again to cook. She had prepared a white rice and black beans, and she put the rice in one bowl, the beans in another one, and the corn in another one. When I got up in the morning, I got it out of the fridge. Of course, it's cold. I figure I'll warm it up. And then I saw there was eggs in the fridge, so I figured, hey, let's just throw these eggs here and just warm it up with the rice, and I'll be like, Chinese rice with eggs, right? Well, evidently, the way I cooked it is not how they do it, because by the time I try to eat that at lunch, I started, and I was like, wow, this is, I don't know, there's something wrong about this. I went through about half of it, and I had to throw away the other half. I couldn't eat it. So I can't cook to save my life. I can order takeout like nobody's business, but cook. But this woman, she can cook. Not only can she cook Puerto Rican food, if she wants to, she'll be very good at cooking Filipino food. She cooks Mexican, Salvadorian, Italian. Whatever she decides she's going to cook, she learns and she does it good. So I focus on the ways that she helps me. Yesterday, when I left the office to go home, I had forgotten my binder. I had forgotten this. And so she was like, let's make a list, So she is much more organized than I am because I'm not organized at all. And so she helps me in those areas. So when I focus on the things that she helps me, and when she focuses on the areas that I help her, now the whole, it's much greater than the sum, because it's not like we're adding, it's like we're multiplying things exponentially. What time do we have? Oh, time is going away. All right. So how do we heal broken trust? Working through minor disappointments and conflicts help you to develop the skills that you will need to deal with the big stuff in your life. So every day we have minor situations, minor conflicts, minor disappointments. And you see sometimes how parents are so overprotective of their kids that they don't want their kids to suffer. I remember when I was growing up, there was no helmets when you rode your bike. You just rode your bike. Well, what happens if you fall down? Well, you hurt and you learn not to do that again, because you realize that wasn't a good plan. But nowadays we have devised all these ways of protecting our children, and there's good reason for that. But the side effect is that because they're so protected, they never learn the skills to deal with the little problems. And so when the big problems in life come, you know what they do? They kill themselves. I had a soldier who was talking about suicide because the girl that he was thinking about asking out turned him down. So he didn't even get to first base. And he's already given up. And we can be so protective. You can't be so selfish that you cannot deal with little problems and circumstances in your relationship. There will be problems. There will be circumstances. And if you cannot deal with those when the big problems come, then you're just going to fall apart. So instead of seeing the little problems of your marriage as, oh my gosh, we're always having problems, try to have a different perspective and say, okay, this is a good learning skill here. And yes, it was a problem, but what can we learn from this? And how can this prepare us for the day in which we will have a problem? Because that day will come, eventually, it will come. And if you're not prepared, then you're going to be suffering quite a bit. So let's say that there's been a major breach of trust in your relationship. How do we now how do we heal that breach of trust? Let's look at what are the common ways that in which couples deal with broken trust. The first one is attacking. You, and there go the epitaphs and all the cuss words. Or the second one is the avoiding part, where we just try to avoid the topic altogether. I've had couples in my office that are struggling with alcoholism. And it's interesting how sometimes people just want to ignore the issue, as if this is not an issue. I was talking to this couple, and a very serious situation happened, and she had an adulterous relationship with her husband's best friend because they were drunk. And she's super sorry because she realizes had she not been drunk, this would have never happened. So I started probing about the use of alcohol. And in the process, I learned that at times her husband has carried her to her bed because she's been tipsy, as he said it. I said, you mean she was drunk? Well, I said, do you think you have an alcoholism problem? She said, no. Do you think we have a problem? I say yes. Because you're avoiding the problem, and now that problem landed you in a really bad situation. But thanks God for grace, he is wanting to maintain their relationship, And now she has to deal with the area of forgiving herself for doing that stupid thing that she did. And so I was very straightforward with them, and I said, you probably should think about never drinking again. I don't know whether or not she decided to follow that advice, but. And then the third option that we have is asserting and affirming each other. So either we attack our partners or each other, or we avoid each other, or we decide to assert and affirm each other. Now, we're not going to read all these. In fact, we're not going to read any of these. But these are 11 proverbs that can help you deal with healthy conflict management. Okay? Before we move on, oh, come on. So most of us know, number one, attacking. You don't have to raise your hand. Most of us have experienced that at some point or another. We have attacked each other. If you've been married, you have attacked someone. Also, avoiding, it's pretty common. Either he avoids her because he doesn't want to talk about her, or she avoids him because she doesn't want to have any conflict. In my relationship with my wife, I'm usually the more attacking type, and she's usually the more avoiding type. She doesn't want to have conflict. But to have successful resolution, when healing is broken, then we need to assert and affirm each other. What that means is that we recognize that there is a problem, but instead of attacking the person, we focus on the problem. Many years ago, when I was pastoring in St. Thomas, Virgin Islands, I wasn't aware of my condition with attention deficit disorder, and I was in the classroom. I was trying to teach kids, and I was also pastoring, and that was driving me nuts because that thing about this, a really bad choice that brought our combined income from like $83,000, this is back in 2004, to about $25,000. And we moved to Puerto Rico. And a leader in the house to convince my wife that this is where God was leading us. That was a lie. I was convinced about it, but it was a lie. And so we moved to Puerto Rico, and for the next several years, she questioned my every financial decision because I put my family in jeopardy. Now, after many years, we were able to not only come back from that low point in our relationship to the same level that we were before, now we're at a different level, which is even better than the one we were before. Because before, the problem was that she never paid attention to finances. She trusted me blindly. And that sounds sweet, but it's really dumb. Never trust someone blindly, especially with finances. Whereas now I still lead the finances, but she takes more part in it. She's a little bit more involved than she was before. And so instead of attacking each other, we assert each other. So we address the issue, and then we affirm our love for each other and continue our relationship. So again, you have those in your workbook, and you can review those at home. So let's look at how do we say, I'm sorry? So this has two components, and we talked about it earlier in the sermon, and but not extensively. But first of all, you need to understand that apologies should be offered and should be received. When somebody says, I'm sorry, you should receive that apology. Now, as I mentioned earlier, forgiveness is a process. Just because someone said, I'm sorry, doesn't mean you immediately say, okay, you're forgiven. Okay? You shouldn't brood over things. You shouldn't harbor resentment. but I understand that it might take some time. So, what are the roles that we have to take? The offender needs to acknowledge that he has done something wrong. And so when you do something wrong, when you offend your spouse, the first step is to say, I'm sorry, I acknowledge that I did something wrong. If you say, I'm sorry, but you're not willing to accept that you did something wrong, she's not going to buy it, and you're quite frankly lying to yourself. And he or she's going to know it. The offended then listens to what the offender is saying. The second step is that once the offender acknowledges what he or she has done wrong, then is to apologize. Look, I'm really sorry I yelled at you. I was tired, and I have no excuse. I'm sorry. And now the offended who is listening has an opportunity to receive the apology. And then the offender can briefly clarify. Because the offended is thinking, yeah, but what happened here? Well, it's been a long week, it's been a long day, I'm driving, I actually was watching this video that I really like, and when you called, you interrupted that moment. And it was just, you cut the inspiration. That's what happened to me last night. And so now the offended can actually believe that your apology is sincere, that you actually mean what you're saying when you offer the apology. We're clear on that? Does that make sense to you guys? Any questions about this so far? And then you finally end by apologizing again, and the offended person can accept it. Yes?
How come sometimes it's hard for men to say sorry?
It's always hard for men. And who wants to admit that they're wrong? Nobody likes, men or women don't like. But for men, it's in the organization I work. When you're in the military and you're wrong, the last thing you want is the people under you to know that you're wrong. It's very hard for someone in high rank to admit they were wrong. It takes a big person to admit that. But by nature, we don't want to acknowledge that we're wrong. And it's difficult. And that's why we have to be humble. And there's no other way for me to put it other than for someone to ask for forgiveness, he or she needs to come to a sense of humility, to acknowledge that I was wrong, and then to apologize. Now, here's the thing that I want to remind you before I move on from this slide. That doesn't happen that clean, that fast. This process may take a whole month, or 2 months, or a week. What's going to make the difference? What is the nature of the offense? So for this young couple who are dealing with adultery, she has apologized a bunch of times. She has explained, and her husband has, very normal for him to bring it up in the near future. And she will have to then go through the very painful process of talking to him about, because there will be questions. And that is okay. Stick with the program. Continue to do this. We're not saying you have to do this within 24 hours. We're not saying that you have to do this in any given time. As long as you follow that, you will be okay. All right. So what happens when we break trust? So first there's hurt, which then leads to anger, and then leads to action. Now, first thing I want to tell you is anger is not sin. You understand that, right? Jesus said, be angry, but sin not. So anger is not sin. Here's what I would propose to you. Holding on to your anger is sinful. You can be angry because anger leads to action. And there are many good reasons for which you ought to be angry and take action. When you see injustice, that should awaken of you a sense of anger and help you spring into action. But when someone hurts you, it's okay to get angry, just don't hold on to that anger. Because if you do, that anger is going to turn into resentment, and that resentment is going to turn into bitterness. And then you're going to be a sour person to be by. Now can lead us to if it's going to lead us to reconciliation, it requires that you will talk it through, that you will understand it, validate it, and then resolve it. So, what is the nature of the hurt? We went through anger, and now the action, and our action is going to be what? We're going to talk about this. We're going to walk, and we're going to talk it through what happened. Why did what was going on in your mind? Why would you think that? Why did you do that? We're going to talk it through. And the offended party, he or she is going to try to understand why the offender did whatever he or she did. And the validation of the process, we're going to separate the facts from the person and not focus on the individual. Remember that we're all sinners and we all make mistakes. And that will then lead us to resolving the issue. But have you noticed that these arrows it seems like they go back and forth? Because it's not a linear process. Sometimes, to me again. Because that's the nature of how we are. Sometimes it's hard for us to understand why would somebody do things like that. And if we cannot understand it, it's hard for us to resolve it. But sometimes even after we think we understand it, other questions may arise. And we decide, okay, we want more information so that we can continue to process this. I'm trying to move fast here because I know our time is almost up and I'm way behind schedule. So what are the 4 stages of our major breakdown? The first stage is shock. When there's a major breakdown of trust, there's this shock. I can't believe that this just happened to me. The second stage is a storm, and that is that emotional hurricane in your heart, the conflicting emotions, because someone whom you love, whom you search for meaning. What does this mean? Does this mean our relationship is over? How are we going to resolve it? Is there hope for us? So there's this idea of let's search and meaning for this. And then the sequel. What's going to happen after this? Okay? And what is rebuilding trust? We talked about forgiveness this morning. One of the things that I failed to mention this morning in terms of forgiveness is that forgiveness is primarily for you. Forgiveness is not for the other person. I don't forgive my wife for her benefit. That does not mean that she cannot get benefit from being forgiven. She certainly can get forgiveness, and usually she will, when you forgive a person, they receive a benefit. But that's not why I do it. I forgive for my own benefit. Because when I'm a very sour person to be around. And so it's almost sounds counterintuitive, but forgiveness is a selfish act. I forgive to heal myself. And I've heard people that said, I will never forgive this person. I can never forgive this person. And when you start asking, you realize they don't have a clear understanding of what is forgiveness. Forgiveness is not saying that what he or she did is right. Forgiveness is saying that regardless of what he or she did, I'm not going to let that control and direct the rest of my life. Forgiveness is saying, I cannot do anything about the past, therefore I'm going to give up the hope that I can somehow make the past a better situation. However horrible your past is your past, and you cannot change it. And so rebuilding trust then is all these actions that I will take to make sure that the other person see that he or she can trust me. And so I tell soldiers when there's something like adultery on the table, I said, these are some of the steps that you need to take. Do you have a cell phone? Yes. Does it have a password? Yes. You might want to get rid of that password. Or tell your wife what's the password. And your phone should be available to her at all times. And my wife has the password to my cell phone. And the other day, she caught me off guard and she said, "Who are you texting with?" Just so happens that I was texting a woman. She was toying with me. And I got upset. It's like, what is this? You have a past. Rebuilding trust is all these things that we do to demonstrate to others that they can once again trust us. And so this biblical model of forgiveness is the story of Joseph. And you look through that story, you will see the idea of forgiveness, the fact that he did not forget what his brethren did to him. But he also, though a victim, he was not victimized by what had happened to him. And this is something that we struggle every day in our society. Because, listen, everybody here is a victim. If you were born, you are a victim. Victimized by sin or anything else that happens in our lives. And so, he did not allow that to make him a sour person. Okay?
There might be a question.
Yes.
Somewhere. Some people might, so forgiveness is a process, and
Mm-hmm.
and at the same time, on another hand, don't hold on to your anger. And the question could be, is there a time period? Like the Bible says, don't let the sun go down
On your anger.
our anger. I'm just, some
So
might ask.
that's, yes, the Bible says don't let the sun go down on your anger. What are they saying? So what if you make me mad 1 hour before sunset? Are you telling me that I only have an hour? Does that make any sense to you? I think what the Bible is simply saying, hey, don't hold on to an anger forever. Okay? If you do something that really hurts me, like you ever been fired from a job? I was fired from a job. I wasn't fired because I was doing a bad job, by the way. My performance reviews were excellent. I was fired because my boss was afraid that I was gunning for her position, which I wasn't at all. But she created this idea in her mind that I was maybe doing that. What made it even more painful was that this happened 2 days before I closed on my house. I'm going to renew your contract, because my contract ended and, they decided not to renew it. His first job he got because my father helped him get that job some, 30 some years before. And so that was really, really painful and really hurtful. And my wife was angry and I was angry. And there was a lot of uncertainty because this would happen on a Tuesday. And Thursday morning, we are signing the papers, closing on our first home. My wife is telling me, what are we going to do? She says, maybe you should call him and call it quits. I said, are you crazy? We're signing this thing. I'm not going to lose the money that I already put there. We'll figure it out. How long do you think it took us to finally process that? 2 weeks? 3 weeks? A month? Tried 3 to 6 months before I could stop thinking about that person and before I could see that person again and nothing happened in me. It took a lot of prayer and took a lot of acceptance that I cannot do it, Lord, if you have to do it because I can't. And one day, the sun went down, and I was no longer upset about it. But yeah, it is a process, and it takes time, and it depends on what is the level of the, did you step on my toe, or did you break my foot? Because those are two very different kinds of pain, okay? So when you look at this, forgiveness focuses on the past. Forgiveness is dealing with what already happened. Trust deals with the present and the future. That's why forgiveness is given and trust is earned. And you cannot earn trust by your words. You have to earn it by your actions. And when it comes to the order, forgiven precedes the rebuild of trust. You cannot begin to trust a person again until they have asked for your forgiveness. In a relationship, there's got to be that asking for forgiveness. Only a fool would trust someone who betrayed them again without the person. When it comes to forgiveness, it's individual. When it comes to trust, it's couple. Sometimes I'm thinking, I think it's both. Do I always need an apology before I can forgive? What do you think? No. There are some people that I will have to forgive without an apology, like the guy who did what he did coming this morning. I had to forgive him without an apology because he was gone. What about people who have a relationship, in a marriage relationship? Then we need that apology. We cannot continue to live with the same person. There's a couple. There's a part of it that deals with the couple. And trust then is more definitely also the couple, but also has to do with the actions of the individual who breached the trust to begin with. All right. So, we're definitely not going to be able to finish everything tonight. It's already 5 o'clock, right? No, what time is it?
5.
Almost 5. And this is session 5, part 1, which means we still have 6 sessions to go through. But it's okay. We'll do as much as we can. You have the workbook. The good thing about the workbook is that you have a lot of information there, if not most of it. And so you can go through that and hopefully ask questions. Now, we're going to break now. Pastor, what time are we coming back? 6? Okay. So before we break, any questions? Or what are your questions so far? Is there anything you heard here that you're thinking, that doesn't make any sense? Or that doesn't apply to us?
I heard something, even though I'm, because I've been reading a lot of books about communication and listening to videos and cassettes and all that. Sometimes people can be totally on 2 different wavelengths. Like if a wife feels she's getting ignored, she might be wanting to talk about real estate or something that happened in another country or that's going on in the world.
Mm-hmm.
When the husband's mind might just be on where's the salt and pepper here.
Mm-hmm.
So she might have to get firm with him and lay down some boundaries if she's ever going to win the chance of him listening to her and having a conversation with her.
Yeah, I mean it's one of those skills that you have to work at. My wife, this happened. In fact, this happened this morning. She starts talking, and I had the music, and we were listening to some music, and it was a little bit loud, and she started talking, and then she stopped. Now, because I've been married with her for as long as I have, I know she's trying to tell me something. So I lowered the music, and I waited to see if she was going to say something. But then she didn't say anything, so I finally said, okay, what was it that you were going to tell me? She said, I don't know, I forgot. I said, we were listening to music, you started talking, I realized that you stopped talking because the music was loud, so I lowered the volume, but you never spoke again. And she said, yeah, that's exactly what happened. I stopped talking because the music was loud. And I said, well, how about this? How about if instead of just starting talking, you say, hey, honey, let me tell you something. See the difference there? Or one of my favorites is I'll have my headphones on. I'm clearly into something with the headphones on, and she starts talking to me. It's like, seriously, got the headphones on. I can't really hear you. So one of the things that we need to do when we want to communicate with people is say, hey, can I talk to you for a second? And get people's attention. And once you get people's attention, now it's the impending question. Okay. All right. I'm going to have to plug this computer.